Y'all got it, y'all got it, y'all got it. So let's celebrate. Come on, Calvin, let's do this. Now I need everybody to clap your hands. Sing along with me. Let the people say, Jesus, Jesus, Jesus. Let them say, Holy Spirit. Yeah. We adore you. Whole world says, and the beat goes. We praise you, Jesus, Jesus, Jesus. We love you. Holy Spirit. Yeah. We adore you.
Sorry about that.
Previous part of the proviso has no application.
Wow. Greetings to you all. Just give me one. Greetings, 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 greetings. I am King Clifford Jefferson, descendant and descendant of Godfrey the Fifth Caravan Jew, son of folk, ruler of Jerusalem. I am the office holder of the corporate office of King Edgar the Peaceful, known as the Lord, or the what we call the Lord Christ. It is February the 10th, 2026, which is equivalent to the birth year 2976. I greet you in my name, in the name of my Queen Sister Galveston from the House of Galveston. I greet you in the name of King Edgar the Peaceful. I greet you in the name of all those who were officers of the church. I greet you in the name of all heirs, all those who are the potential inheritors of this illustrious estate. Today we have what remains of the system when it collapsed, part 7, potential inheritors. Once again, what remains of the system when it collapsed, part 7, for the potential inheritors. This is another marvelous lesson that I have prepared for you, leaving off from part 6 of what remains of after the system collapsed. So I hope you all watch part 1 through part 6 so that part 7 can unfold like it's supposed to unfold, just like a flower. So with that, let's get started with this marvelous lesson. It might be a long one today because I got a lot to cover, but nonetheless, it is a marvelous lesson. As always, we need to backtrack and go over what it is that we discussed in the prior lessons. So we're going to do that, just spend a couple of minutes on it for all those who are caught up and all those who are trying to play catch up. This is for you. All the descendants and heirs of the Anglo-Saxon Berbers of America, of the English Empire that is within the continent of what we now call America. Once again, we're going to speak in a language that you should be able to comprehend, all you Berbers. Just from the diagram alone, you should be able to comprehend how important these lessons are to you and your family and your salvation. These are not my instructions, but these are divine instructions from the divine authority of our ancestors, okay? These are the divine instructions by the divine authority by our ancestors, who are the Anglo-Saxon Berbers of America, who are within their own English empire, which is within the continent of America. So if you are in fact an Anglo-Saxon Berbers within the continent of America, within your own empire, then you are blessed to be under the divine authority, okay, of your ancestors, who are the lords, who are identified as the gods. And by you being under that divine authority, you are under the grace of God, or the lords. Why? Because you are within their jurisdiction. You are within the jurisdiction of the divine authority, which puts you in the grace of that divine authority that comes from the unseen one. Okay? Very important. But for order for that to happen, for you to be in the jurisdiction of the gods under the divine authority, which is the grace, okay, the protection, you must first be what? Baptized. All right, listen now. Listen very close. You must first be baptized. This is page 1. First divine instructions. You must first be baptized. We all got an understanding about baptism, but we don't understand it from a lawful perspective, okay? Because when you're baptized from a lawful perspective, in which we teach it, you now become a lawful vessel, okay? A lawful vessel, as a result of you being baptized, puts you in the jurisdiction of that divine authority from God, which puts you in His grace. Okay? Very important to understand that. You must be baptized. If you're not baptized, by way of being a lawful vessel, not just a vessel, but a lawful vessel. The only way you can become a lawful vessel by being baptized is taking on a jurisdictional personality. The only way you can be baptized to become a lawful vessel, because the vessel is the corporation soul. The life-giving water is the mission of the corporation soul, or what we will call back in our ancient ecclesiastical or religious or theosophical, it was called the church, okay? The church, all right? But now you're taking on a jurisdictional personality to make you a lawful vessel, which is what we call baptism, which puts you in the jurisdiction of God's grace as a result of that divine authority. This is very, very important, because we need to see the transition, all right? The decentralization of the divine grace under the divine authority, which is now a part of the jurisdiction that we reside now, where we reside now. Okay, so baptism that puts you in the jurisdiction of that divine authority based upon that grace that we all seek. You must take on a jurisdictional personality. How do we do that? This is not just understanding from your religious law, i.e. canon law, or English ecclesiastical law. Nonetheless, the ending part is law, because we're talking about a lawful vessel. Key word law, because we're talking about a lawful vessel, and the only way you become a lawful vessel is to be baptized by water that's in that vessel. Okay? That vessel. That vessel determines the jurisdiction, which God's grace under God's divine authority, whoever the God is we're talking about. Okay? When we understand it from the legal perspective, we understand that lawful vessel, based upon the jurisdictional personality, is determined by American statutory law. Because American statutory law, by way of the decentralization, was in fact called the divine authority or divine law. Okay? Very important. That gave you the ability to become a statutory entity. Okay? A statutory entity. We must understand that. The water is the authority. The vessel is a statutory entity. You become a statutory entity as a result of you become a part of the vessel, as a result of the water, which is the mission, which is where your authority comes from. So if you follow that authority, you are in fact under God's grace, because you're within God's jurisdiction, and that results from your jurisdictional personality. Okay? Jurisdictional personality. It is a jurisdictional person. it says jurisdictional personality. That's very, 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 very important because it determines if you are a lawful vessel. All right? To be a lawful vessel, you must take on the consciousness of a jurisdictional personality to become a statutory entity to fit within the framework of God's law, how it be applied in present day. Stemming from canon law, English ecclesiastical law, now been decentralized by way of what we call 16:1-28, now known as a corporation sole, governed under what we now call American statutory law. Very important. When you understand that, then you are within the jurisdiction of God's divine grace, under God's divine authority, and we understand that jurisdiction has to do with the ability to apply law. Okay. Matter of fact, let's look at these definitions before we move forward. Okay, to understand how important this is, because Title 46 is your ability to be within God's jurisdiction, because Title 46 governs property. We know property governs land. Okay? Property is about land, the interest of land that you have based upon that capacity as a lawful vessel being baptized because of the jurisdictional personality that allowed you to not become a natural person anymore, but a statutory entity. Very important. So let's define these terms. All right? Because without defining them, you would be out of God's grace because you're not under God's divine authority, all right, based upon the jurisdiction. The jurisdiction. Okay? Right? The jurisdiction. The jurisdiction is what we call North America, or America. Not North America, but in fact America. So if you're in America and you are Anglo-Saxon Berber, then you are within the jurisdiction and under the grace and protection of that divine authority, which is now known as the statutory law. Why? Because it was the law that baptized you, okay, that made you a statutory entity. This you must comprehend. Acting outside of that dimension of the statutory entity, which is the life-giving water that we are allowed to sanctify our other brothers and sisters and families, you are considered ultra virus, outside of the scope of that divine authority. Okay? Now let's define some words. Let's define jurisdiction first. Remove the spookism. Jurisdiction. Hold that thought, everyone. So now we're not reading about a belief, theology, all right? We're not talking about religious belief or theology, okay? We're talking about, based upon the term jurisdiction. We're looking at the word jurisdiction as it applies to law, not spiritual law, but secular law, okay? Because secular law, as we just said, puts you under God's divine authority, which is God's grace. Why? Because through the law, you have now been baptized, all right, as a result of you understanding the personality that you must have to be under God's grace, and that's understanding jurisdictional authority, okay? So jurisdiction, from Latin juris, meaning law, and dicio, meaning speech or declaration. It's a legal term for the legal authority, hence the word the divine authority, held by a legal entity to enact justice. It didn't say natural person, it says a legal entity. So we're in fact talking about the statutory entity only because you're a jurisdictional personality. Okay? Jurisdiction is rarely claimed to be complete. Rather, it is limited, for examples, by geography, subject matter, or other factors. It is only within the scope, ultra virus, inside the limits of such jurisdiction that, for example, the parties to a dispute having standing capacity to bring the matter, i.e. a legal question, before a judge who has the power or jurisdiction to decide the authoritativity of the matter. Okay, I'll do that in there. So we define the word jurisdiction. Okay, when we're talking about jurisdiction, the way we apply it, we're not talking about a church. We're not talking about what we call a synagogue. We're talking about a court of law that has the authority to hear matters as a result of them having what? The jurisdiction. Okay? That's one word. All right? So if you are in God's jurisdiction, then you're under God's divine authority because you have found God's grace. Okay? That means you're protected. All right? The only way that can be done is the next box down. Is through baptism, okay? By becoming a lawful vessel through jurisdictional personality. Not a jurisdictional person, but a jurisdictional personality, which is in fact the same thing as a jurisdictional person, but the capacity is different. Okay? The capacity is different. I'm going slow for everyone. So write that word jurisdiction down. Let's look up jurisdictio. Write this word down. Nothing to do with belief. Okay? Nothing to do with theology. Not saying that it's not rooted in it. We're talking about the application of that source, because it's only a representation. It's not the reality. The representation is not the reality. And we'll talk more about that in a few. Okay? So everybody write that word down. Jurisdictio. Let me warm my coffee up. We might not get out of here till about 4. By the way, I closed on my estate on this Friday. Okay? So I have a equitable estate that belongs to me in my personal capacity as a result of me being in God's grace. Okay? We'll talk about that in later lessons. But for now, let's just deal with jurisdictio and the definition of what jurisdictio actually means. 1. Pertaining to the functioning of courts or the role of a judge. 2. Linked to the principles or science of law. So when you're thinking about being under God's grace, based upon God's divine authority, all right, very important to understand that. You must be in God's jurisdiction, okay? In order for that to happen, you must be baptized by way of you becoming a lawful vessel, and the only way that can be done is you have a jurisdictional personality. So jurisdictional pertains to the functioning of courts and the rules of the judge. So you should be able to understand how the courts work, or the process, or the procedures, or the administration of how the courts exercise their authority or their capacity as prescribed by statute. Okay? Because they are in fact what? Statutory entities. Okay? Statutory entities. Very important. So we just need points 1 and 2. Now let's go into personality and let's define that. Write this word down, y'all. Go to whatever source you want to go to for it, because it's only a representation, not the reality. I know the algorithm is messed up, but that's okay. It's not meant to reach everyone. Personality. Not spookism, not theology, not religion, not based upon your assumptions or beliefs. We're looking at it from a jurisdictional overstanding, all right? Because jurisdictio determines your personality, which determines your capacity to become a statutory entity, okay? Which is a lawful vessel in the eyes of the law, okay? As a result of the law that governs the jurisdiction, all right, which is the divine authority, because the law is the highest. That's your grace that you need to be under, okay? And no church is going to get that to you, because there's a separation of church and state. So personality is a characteristic way of thinking, okay, feeling, and behaving. Personality embraces moods, attitudes, and opinions, i.e. assumptions, all right, i.e. presumptions, i.e. Beliefs. It shapes opinions, and most clearly expressed in interactions with other people. It includes behavioral characteristics, both inherited and acquired. This is called an inherited assumption, all right, that distinguish one person from another, and that can be observed in people's relations to the environment and to the social group. Okay? So every group don't have this understanding about the jurisdictional personality that gives you the ability to be a statutory entity because of your competency. Okay? Based upon the mission. Okay? Very important. Let's go here now. What is the statutory entity? Not because it's a, but it passed that we're able to exemplify as a result of us becoming a new lawful vessel. Okay? Not because of a belief, but because the statutory allows you to act in that capacity as a statutory entity, to allow yourself to be put in that jurisdiction, okay? Based upon the jurisdictional personality, which puts you in God's grace, okay? Because you got a lot of jurisdictional personality, but they don't find God's grace. Why? Because it's not God's divine authority being exemplified, because there is what? A separation of church and state. So a statutory entity, let's define that. Write that down. Because we must follow God's law, command, right? A statutory entity means any corporation, company, board, commission, authority, or other entity established by or under any enactment to provide goods or services to the public or to fulfill regulatory or other government functions, and such entities should be classified as either state-owned enterprises in the first schedule of commercial state-owned enterprises and the second schedule. So these are some examples of entities that are derive their capacities via by way of what we call statutes. Very important. So write those three terms down: jurisdiction, jurisdictio, personality, and statutory entity. Okay, because this is what we're trying to evolve into. Okay, very important. This is based upon God's what? Divine authority. Okay, His grace of the grace of God's divine authority only results in you being within God's jurisdiction, and for that to happen, you must be baptized as a lawful vessel, and that's based upon your jurisdictional personality. Okay, very important to make you a statutory entity, and that comes by way of 60:1-28, and by way of 46:3- what was it? Title 46. Okay, and all the sections of Title 46. All right. Divine authority refers to the ultimate power and sovereignty of God over all creation. We're talking about things that we see in reality. Land. You got to, first thing it must come up is land. Because without land, none of the other stuff would be able to have their capacity. Okay? I mean, as far as occupying is concerned. Okay? All right? We're not mammals, nor are we amphibian. Okay? Things that live in the water. And we sure ain't up in the sky. All right? Like Captain Kirk them was, which we're going to talk about today. All right? Very important to the origin of or the purpose of this lesson. So divine authority refers to the ultimate power and sovereignty of God over all creation, meaning everything. It encompasses God's right to govern. We're talking about God's divine authority to command and judge. Okay, very important. All right, whether you're talking about ecclesiastical canon, which now has been secularized, which is now based upon your courts. Okay, your court system. All right, jurisdiction. This authority is inherited in God's nature as the creator and sustainer of the universe, and is revealed through His word, His actions in history, and His ongoing relationship with humanity. Okay? This is very important because this is talking about the capacity. Okay? The capacity as a result of you have the nature of God. Okay? The nature of God based upon how God identifies or reveals Himself in modern day is through the law. Okay? It's called the supreme law of the land. We must understand that from a spiritual or religious as well as from a legal or secular, because they all run parallel. Okay, they run parallel. Now let's get to the lesson. Right? Let's get to the lesson. You're going to love this. Back to the next picture. So we understand the process, right? We all understand the process to get from the state we are in now, okay, to the state where we should be in as lawful vessels because of the understanding I'm giving you to make you a statutory entity through jurisdictional personality, to understanding the law of God. It is the statutory language that exists today. It gives the ability to be able to inherit and hold, administer, and transmit God's property to God's people under Title 46. We must comprehend the transition of God's grace, okay, from olden day to modern day, okay. This is the only way it can be done. You must become a living vessel, okay. A living vessel is a statutory entity, and the mission of the statutory entity is the authority. That is the life-giving water. That gives you the ability to be in God's jurisdiction, to be under God's grace, because you're following God's authority. If you don't, then it's an act of what? Ultra virus. Okay? You're wasting the water. Okay? You're wasting the water, and we do not want to do that. So we stay within the confines of the law. Okay? Though physical, consciously we are a statutory entity. As a result of, we understand what the mission is preservation and continuity of who we say we are. Okay? All right? And why are we here? And that's the mission. Okay? Look at the family. All right? So I spent enough time backtracking. Let's move forward with part 7 of what remains of the system when it collapses. Bypass this. Bypass that. We talked about that already. Even though it's some good information, you should go back and review the prior lessons. Take your time with it, all right? Because without the prior lessons, part 1 through 6, you're not going to even understand part 7, okay? Very, very important. Let's start here. Talking about divine authority, right? That's what we're talking about. Divine authority. Let's talk about that a little bit more before we move forward. Divine authority, or God's power, okay? All right, we understand through God's power or God's authority will give you the capacity, okay? All right, will give you the capacity through statute, okay? Very important. This goes back into the divine rights of kings, all right, which claims of divinity or authority such as in the titular King of Kings or King of Kings, and was an imperial title employed primarily by monarchs based in the Middle East and in Indian subcontinent. Okay, very important. We're talking about the term King of Kings, all right? King of Kings. It was also used by sultans of sultans and is the sultanic equivalent of King of Kings. And similarly, Kagan can mean Khan of Khans. Later, lesser versions, Amir al-Amura became Amirs of Emirs, or Beyler Bey became Beys of Beys appeared. Okay? And they all have their divine authority, which puts you in the jurisdiction to be under the grace of that divine authority, whether you're going by the ancient law or the modern day law. Very important to understand that, all right? Why is this important? And mention Khan, okay? And mention Khan. We know that the word Kirk, where we get the person Captain Kirk, all right, the origin of the term Kirk is also pronounced church, okay? It's pronounced church, okay? Kirk means church. We know Kirk's arch rival was Khan, okay? Was Khan. Very important to understand the origin of the movie Star Trek, all right? Before we even go into it, let's just read some of the symbolism in reference to the movie Star Trek. All right, we know that Khan is also a what we call an exonym for a group of people who descended down from what we call the we're going to talk more about that from the Singh dynasty, okay, which are Mongol tribes, all right, people who live in Asia and the Middle East. We're going to go into that a little further, all right, but let's just get a little breakdown. Figures. We're going to talk about Khan, the term Bey, the term Kirk, and then we're going to parallel that with King Ager, okay, based upon his decentralized system that we follow here today, based upon the divine authority that King Ager decentralized, which is now called statutory authority, which is no longer denotes to a belief, okay, all right, very important. So just look at these figures and break them down. If you want to write them down on your own, you can do so, or refer back to the video at your own time or your own discretion. Figure 1, Khan. He is a fictional archetype, okay? Conqueror archetype, and authority through power, superiority, and denomination. Very important. We're looking at the figures, the symbolic roles, and the type of authority represented before we even go into the chart, okay? Very important. Before we even go into the chart, because we understand that the word Kirk means church, and the origin of church got their start from fiction, okay? Because we know the church deals with a representation or a model or a stand-in, okay, for what's not a reality, i.e. a fiction, all right? So we're dealing with the figure, symbolic role, and the type of authority that they represented, okay? We're talking about Khan, okay? Conquering archetype, authority through power, superiority, and denomination. Then we have Beys, okay? Symbolic title, which is also archetype, which were regional governors as archetype. Their authority was through delegated rules, administration hierarchy, okay? Then we got Kirk, i.e. Captain Kirk, also fictional. Was a moral decision leader, authority through consciousness, responsibility, and choice. Now let's not forget Spock, because Spock dealt with logic, okay? He was from Vulcan, but he dealt with logic, okay? Then we have King Ager, which is a historical figure, who was to note his symbolic role as a historical figure was sacred ruler and coronation traditions, which also had authority through duties, covenants, moral obligation tied to what? The office, all right? The office, all right? So we consider all the figures and their symbolic role based upon their authority. We have to now look at that based upon the divine authority that we and every person and every group that exists today claim that they have a protection based upon that authority or law, based upon modern law, okay? Where do we find it? Because we know that all law has been secularized. There's a separation between belief and what's real, okay? What's reality? So to understand reality, we must look at modern law, which is constitutional order, which is authority through what? Impersonal rules, institutions, and due process of law. Okay? That fits right in line with the jurisdiction of the divine authority being under God's grace based upon the baptismal by you becoming a lawful vessel by way of your jurisdictional personality, which means understanding the law of the courts. Okay? All right? Understanding the law of the courts and how the courts interact with the law. Okay? Let's continue. Updated symbolic progression. Power rule, delegated authority, moral duty, and sacred duty, and rule of law. Let's set the stage. Let's set the stage, all right? The one who bears the burden, okay? You ever heard in the movie Star Trek says, the needs of the many outweighs the needs of the one. Okay? Versus the needs of the one outweigh the needs of the many. Okay? That was not King Edgar's philosophy. Okay? That was not his law. That was not his custom or tradition. Okay? He sacrificed the one for the many. Okay? Versus the many the one over the many versus the many over the one. Okay? So we're talking about a power rule, delegated order, moral duty, sacred duty, which automatically in modern day is called what? The rule of law. Now let's look at the different capacities of all the figures that we just talked about. Now first we got conqueror, a Khan type. Strongest individual imposes order. Then we got the governors, the Bay types. Appointed authority and maintain structure. There's nothing wrong with that. Nothing wrong with that. Now let's set the stage for the one who bears the burden in regards to Captain Kirk and King Edgar. All right? Kirk's type was a moral leader, an individual who bears ethical responsibility. And then we have King Edgar, a sacred type, anointed ruler, bound by oath. All right? Constitutional order, law itself becomes the one. Okay? The law itself becomes the one. Very important to understand this. If you need to watch it again, please go back. How does this apply? How each protects the many. Model and why the many are protected. Okay, once again, let's look at the model and why the many are protected. A power rule and why the many are protected is because of stability through strength. We know that Title 46 is a statute that deals with stability of our of the continuity of the office to maintain possession of property. Okay, that was stability, the statutes of God. Okay, power rule, stability through strength. Delegated rule, i.e. the Bays, structured through administration. Then you have Kirk, moral leader, decisions guided by conscientiousness, and then we have King Edgar, sacred kingship, rules morally bound to serve. All right, not for himself, but for the many, which has automatically been decentralized into what we now call the rule of law. Systems limit personal power. Because remember, it's not for the needs of the one, but for the needs of the many. The needs of the many outweigh the needs of the one. Okay? What do Bay add symbolically? Okay? Bay represents authority that is not absolute. Okay? Very important. Bays represent authority that is not absolute. Power that is derived, not inherited. Governance through organization, not conquest. A step toward institutional authority. So in the chart, which we'll review in a second, Bays become the bridge between personal dominance and structured governance, just like King Edgar. Okay, King Edgar became a bridge in regards to the capacity of office for the sake of the many and not for the sake of the one. Okay, he cared about the continuity of government. He cared about the continuity of the procedural processes that government functioned off. This is the framework, the structure, the backbone. This is what the mission is all about. Okay, this is the water, the life-giving water that King Edgar gave to us. Let's continue. Final concept. Final concept. The diagram which we're about to look at shows the evolution of how societies imagine authority. It started from force to administration to becoming conscientious law which then became sacred obligations, which manifested what we now have now as a legal system. That's a clean political, not political, philosophical art. Okay? That this is a clean political philosophy, not just a philosophy. Okay? A clean political philosophy. All right? Why? Because we're going to back it up. Let's back it up. Symbolic evolution of our current system that we have, okay, which is divine authority, okay, which puts us in God's jurisdiction to be under God's grace, all right, very important. So we must understand the capacity, all right, the capacity, symbolic evolution of the capacity, i.e., the authority. We know our authority is statutory now. It ain't based upon no belief. The law says what it is, okay, and it's not for our own personal self, but it's for the sake of the many. Okay, very important. So before we even go into the clip, let's just look at the symbolic evolution of authority. All right, from all the figures, whether fiction or historical, let's just look at them real quick. Get another breakdown. Okay, symbolic evolution of authority. Khan, which was Captain Kirk's, when we know where Kirk means church, arch rival. Khan was a conqueror and archetype. Authority through power, superiority, domination, stage, power rule, the one who bears burden, the strongest individual. Okay? Now we look at that from a fiction, or we can look at that from historical. We know that there is a nation or a group of people over in what we call the Middle, not the Middle East, but over in Asia, okay, known as the Khans, okay, very important. They set the standard or paved the way for what we call the Arabs, okay. We know the Arabs. We know that Bey is a term or a title of nobility for an Arab denoting to a type of capacity, okay, an official capacity, okay. So Bay regional governors are also a archetype, all right, because they descend from hierarchy, okay. Authority through authority through a delegated rule, administration, hierarchy, and the stage that they grew from was based upon delegated order, okay. The one who bears burdens, appointed authority, and maintains what? Structure, okay, structure. So we got the Khans, then we have the Bays. Now we got who? Captain Kirk. Right, Captain Kirk. We know when we get into the movie of we get into the Crusade. We know that against the Christian church and the Arabs, or i.e. the Muslims. Okay, very important. That story fits right into the equation. I talked about that in prior lessons in regards to the understanding of what took place on all continents, whether it's what we talked about, Canaan, Jerusalem, the Maghreb, the Iberian Peninsula, France. All right, we talked about all the conquests that took place based upon the origin that goes back to these who was looked at for the needs of the one versus the many. Okay, that goes back to Khan and the Bays. Okay, very important. So now we're linking it to Captain Kirk, and we know the word Kirk is also synonymous with the word church, symbolically, who is a moral decision leader, authority through consciousness, responsibility, choice. All right? The stage, moral leadership. The one who bears burdens, individual bears ethical responsibility. And then we have King Edgar. Okay? Now we got King Edgar. King Edgar was a sacred ruler based upon the coronation tradition. Okay? Very important. The coronation tradition, which we talk about in a second. Authority through duty, covenant, moral obligation, tied to the office, stage, and sacred kingship. Okay? continuity of office. 16:1-28. Okay? In lieu of the mission, continuity of possession of land, i.e., Title 46. All right? That is our obligation in lieu of us being statutory entities for that purpose only. Okay? Not for our own self, but for the needs of what? The many. Which is the reason why we have what we now call modern law, which is now modern law, which is now called constitutional law. Authority through impersonal rules, institutions, due process of law, which stays is set based upon what we call the rule of law, the one who bears burden. Law itself becomes what? The one, protecting what? Many, okay? One protecting the many. It ain't the many protecting the one, it's the one protecting the many, okay? So by force, once again, resulted in an administration, okay? A change from centralization to decentralization as a result of conscientious reflection, all right? Which now became a sacred obligation to make sure that the administration was not overthrown again by force. We don't want to go backwards, we want to go forward by understanding what happened prior to us moving forward. And that is understanding the divine authority, which keeps us in God's grace, no matter where we are, governed by God's authority, which is based upon the law governing jurisdiction. Okay? I hope that makes sense to each and every one of you. It probably don't, but that means you don't have what? The capacity. So that means that you're not a lawful vessel in the eyes of God's law, which governs the jurisdiction and whatever jurisdiction you are at. And if God's law is not statutorily applied, which gives you a capacity, then guess what? You have not been baptized. Okay? And the law speaking. Now let's really get. Why am I talking about Star Trek? See, we're not just talking about Star Trek. We're mapping out a line that stems from myth to what became a empire, all right? An empire through rebellion, then manifesting in what we call law, across centuries of misunderstanding. So let's turn our material into a clean, expanded conceptual chart and then go deep on to how it impacted to what we call modern day slavery, okay? Which is the dimension that we're still in. Since the spine we want, we must emphasize that, okay? So let's emphasize it. Let's get it, brothers and sisters. You're not going to get it anywhere else. Let's take another look at this chart. Let's take another look at this chart. Okay, the same chart. Okay, very important. But before we do that, all right, let's look at a clip. All right, let's look at a clip in between arch rival Khan and Captain Kirk. All right. Very important that we go back in time, all right, and see what the whole story is about. And the majority of the story is not about Khan or Captain Kirk. It's about a gentleman by the name of what we call John Milton, okay, who was a historical figure in the English Civil War. Now, my question is, how the hell Captain Kirk and Khan, which is Captain Kirk is from the 23rd century and Khan is from the 19th century, okay? So they are one from the past and one is from the future, and they're making reference to a guy that's not in their future. He's presently a figure that existed in what we call the 17th century. Okay, very important. Just look at the parallel to this. All right, let's watch the video first, and pay close attention. Okay. Because this determines who God's seed is, okay? Who God's seed is. I'm telling you that we are God's seed, all right? We are God's seed because we live according to God's authority, which is God's grace, here on what we call planet Earth, which Captain Kirk was supposed to have came from. Okay? Very important to understand how I'm about to break this down. But first, let's watch the clip. Okay? First, let's watch the clip. Y'all better listen. Let me warm my coffee up. I don't want to miss this. Remember, you got Captain Kirk, okay? You got MacGyver. You got Leonard Nimoy, okay, who's Dr. Spock. Then you got McCoy. You got Mick, which is a Scottish surname. Then you got McCoy, which is Mick is a Scottish surname. And then you got Scotty, okay? And Scotty says, recognize that they are all from what? Scottish descent. And the Scottish kings were the ones who took part in what we call the English Civil War, okay? Which John Milton was the one mentioned in the movie Star Trek who had a part to play in the English Civil War, okay? So it's very important to comprehend what they're talking about in the future, okay? About what's going on in the past, okay? And they encompass a superhuman race known as Kong and his descendants, all right? Not based upon the needs of the many over the one, but the needs over the one over the many, okay? Very important. And this is the reason why we must understand the Star Trek movie, okay? Which we're going to go into right now. Just let me warm my coffee up. Like, share, subscribe. It's about to get good, y'all. Matter of fact, let's not go there right now. Let's go look at Khan himself. Read about Khan real quick. Let's look at Khan and John Milton. We already know who Captain Kirk is, all right? Let's look at John Milton and Khan, okay? This is in reference to what we call the eugenics wars, okay? How many of you heard of the eugenic wars, okay? A superior race, okay? You about to know about it now. Let's just look at it. Khan Noonien Singh is a fictional character in the Star Trek science fiction franchise, a genetically engineered superhuman who first appeared as the main antagonistic in the Star Trek, the original series episode Space Seed. You hear that? In 1967, it was portrayed by Ricardo Montalban, who reprised his role in the 1982 film Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan. In the 2013 film Star Trek Into Darkness, he is portrayed by the Benedict Cumberbatch. Okay? Very, very important. Khan was in fact called a space seed. All right? Khan controlled more than a quarter of the earth during the eugenic wars of the 19th century. Listen, y'all. 1990s, okay? Khan controlled more than a quarter of the earth during the eugenic wars of 1990s. Now, how in the hell is Khan controlling a quarter of the earth through the eugenic wars in the 1990s when Khan is from the past and Kirk is from the future? Okay? The 23rd century. After being revived from suspended animation in 2267, we know the birth year is what? 2976. For the Gregorian year, it's 2026. Okay? So it says, by the crew of the Starship Enterprise, he attempts to capture the starship, but it was thwarted by James T. Kirk and exiled to Zeta Alpha 5, where he has the chance to create a new society with his people. Listen. In Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan, set 15 years after Space Seed, Khan escapes his exile, sets out to exact revenge on Kirk. And we know the word Kirk means what? Church. All right, let's get it. Khan makes his introductory appearance as the antagonistic in the episode What? Space Seed. First broadcast on February 16, 1967. According to the backstory revealed in the episode, Khan is one of the group of genetically engineered superhumans, bred to be free of the usual human mental and physical limitations, meaning that they were emotionless, just like Spock, okay? They dealt with logic, not emotion, who were removed from power after the eugenic wars of the 1990s. Very, very important. The eugenic wars, all right? We're going to talk about it in a second. Khan has been both the most successful conqueror and the most benign ruler of the group, ruling more than a quarter of Earth areas across Asia to the Middle East from 1992 to 1996. Y'all better listen, with a firm but generally peaceful hand until he was disposed. Okay? Now, how in the hell is Khan ruling half of the globe that consists of Asia and the Middle East? And we know who are the nationalities who came from Asia and the Middle East. Okay? Very, very important. We know Khan looks more like a Cleon. Okay? Like that was the extraterrestrial seed that Khan descended down from, which then birthed what we call the Arabs. Okay? Very important. We understand that. Move a little further. This is where it really gets interesting. When Khan's sleep chamber malfunctions, he is transported to the Enterprise, where he reawakens and learns he is in what? The 23rd century. Did y'all hear that? Given spacious quarters while Botany Bay is tiled to a starbase, Khan fascinates and charms the ship's historian, Marla MacGyver. And we know MacGyver, Mech is a Scottish surname, which is called Madeline Root, while using his access to the ship's technical manuals to learn how to take over and operate the what? USS Enterprise, 1701. Okay? Key point. The crown was around in what? 1701 and 1702 AD. Then we talking about the Scottish or the British crown, okay? Once they conquer what? The English crown. Very important because that's when John Milton comes in, all right? MacGyver agrees to help Khan revive the other supermen, allowing him to organize an attempting takeover. Mutiny, y'all. Mutiny. To coerce the Enterprise crew to cooperate with him, Khan places Captain James T. Kirk, which is William Shatner, in the ship's decompression chamber and threatens to kill Kirk unless the crew submits. MacGyver cannot stand by as her captain dies and frees Kirk, who neutralizes Khan's men by using a neuro gas. Khan heads to the engineering and sets the ship's engines to self-destruct, whereupon he is incapacitated by Kirk. Captain Kirk conducts a hearing sentencing Khan and his followers to exile on an uncolonized world, set to Alpha 5. Khan accepts Kirk's challenge, invoking the fall of Lucifer and Milton's Paradise Lost. Milton's Paradise Lost. And MacGyver joins Khan rather than face court-martial. Spock's Leonard Nimoy wonders what the seed Kirk has planted and will bear in 100 years. Once again, I repeat, Khan and his followers to exile. Captain Kirk conducts a hearing, i.e., court. All right, sentencing. All right, sentencing Khan and his followers to exile on the uncolonized world. Okay, in order for you to colonize it, it must be uncolonized. Okay. And it says, seek the Alpha 5. Khan accepts Kirk's challenge, invoking the fall of Lucifer and Milton's Paradise Lost. And MacGyver joins Khan rather than face court-martial. Spock, i.e. Leonard Nimoy, wonders what the seed Kirk has planted and will bear in 100 years. So Lucifer was a poem written by John Milton called Paradise Lost. Did you hear that? Paradise Lost. Let's look at that real quick. Paradise Lost. Paradise Lost is an epic poem in a blank verse by an English poet known as John Milton from 1608 to 1674. The poem concerns the biblical story, listen, of the fall of men, i.e. Khan. Okay? Khan. All right? Very important. The temptation of Adam and Eve by fallen angels, Satan, and their expulsion from what? The Garden of Eden. We're talking about New Jersey, y'all. Once again, Paradise Lost is an epic poem in a blank verse by the English poet John Milton in 1608 to 1674. Now, remember what Spock said about coming back in 100 years, and they're on the spaceship, okay? And they're kicking Khan off the spaceship, and they said that Khan ruled what? Asia and what? The Middle East. Very important to understand the importance of John Milton's Paradise Lost concerning the biblical narrative, i.e. the religious theosophical narrative in regards to them being outside of God's grace because they're not under God's divine authority. Why? Because they're not within his jurisdiction. Okay? Very important that you comprehend what your king is telling you. Now let's go to John Milton. John Milton, born December 9th, 1608 to 8th of November, 1674, was what? An English poet, a polemist, and a civil servant. His 1667 epic poem, Paradise Lost, was a written in blank verse and included 12 books, written in a time of immense religious flux and political what? Upheaval. Hear that? It addressed the fall of man, okay? Not some religious, but what was happening on the planet when John Milton wrote this book. Had nothing to do with Captain Kirk, had nothing to do with Khan, but yet Khan and Captain Kirk, one from the 19th century and one from the 23rd century, are talking about books that they got in their library about what's happening here on Earth, okay? All right, what's happening here on Earth, and we know that Adam and Eve were put on Earth because what? They fell. Okay, they were not lawful vessels. Okay, they had to be baptized. Okay, they had to be baptized with understanding what God's divine authority required of them, and that was to take on a jurisdictional personality in regards to God's divine authority, which is now called statutory law. And for that, they must be baptized into a lawful vessel by way of becoming a statutory entity acting in that capacity. Anything other than that will be considered what? Ultra virus. Okay? So we see here that the Paradise Lost was a written in blank verse and included 12 books, written in a time of immense religious flux and political upheaval. It addressed the fall of man, including the temptations of Adam and Eve by the fallen angels, Satan, and God's expulsion of them from the Garden of Eden. Okay? Very important. So when we look at the video on YouTube about to watch, who represents God, who represents Satan? Okay? Who represents God, who represents Satan? Because Khan and Kirk, and we know Kirk means church, is talking about John Milton, and we know that John Milton was part of what we call the Church of England, not the English Church of England, but the Church of England. Okay, as it said here, he also served as a civil servant for the Commonwealth of England under its Council of State, and later under who? Oliver Cromwell. This is very, very important, especially with the clip we're about to watch. So now let's watch it. Listen to the conversation. These are the gods talking, not the true gods. All right, not the true gods. We are the true gods. All right. While they're trying to be superhumans, we were the superhumans. Why? Because it wasn't trying to make us better through eugenics. It was trying to make them better through eugenics, while we were still at that time considered property. Let's get it.
Date 3143.3. Control of the Enterprise has been regained. I wish my next decisions were no more difficult. And his people. What a waste to put them in a reorientation center. And what do I do about MacGyvers?
Record tapes engaged and ready, Captain.
They're in court, y'all.
The hearing is now in session. Under the authority vested in me by Starfleet Command, I declare all charges and specifications in this matter have been dropped.
Jim, read you have the authority.
Mr. Spock, I believe our heading takes us near the Ceti Alpha star system.
Quite correct, Captain. Planet number 5 there is habitable, although a bit savage, somewhat inhospitable.
But no more than Australia's Botany Bay colony was at the beginning. Those men went on to tame a continent. Can you tame a world?
Have you ever read Milton, Captain?
Listen, y'all.
Yeah. choice of court-martial or accompanying them there.
It will be difficult. A struggle at first, even to stay alive, to find food.
I'll go with him, sir.
Superior woman.
Forgotten something else I wanted. World win pie.
This hearing is closed.
Now listen to what Spock said, what McCoy says.
It's a shame for a good Scotsman to admit it, but
Good Scotsman.
Milton.
Lucifer made when he fell into the pit.
Murder,
to
Lucifer
rule in
fell
hell,
into the
serve
pit.
in hell.
Let's go back. So,
Would be an
Up on Milton. It's a shame for a good Scotsman to admit it, but I'm not up on Milton.
The statement Lucifer made when he fell into the pit is it's better to rule in hell than serve in heaven.
Would be interesting, Captain, to return to that world in 100 years and learn what crop had sprung from the seed you planted today.
Yes, Mr. Spock. It would indeed.
did y'all hear that? Talking about a return to the planet. A return back. All right, based upon not but cultivation of the planet. Okay, I hope y'all see the link. All right. If you don't, you're about to see it here. Now you heard him said, have you read Milton? Now they're in the future, in a spaceship. All right, talking about John Milton and John Milton poem about Paradise Lost, where Khan got to go. He lost paradise. Okay, he's sent down to a garden. Okay, and he's got to raise a whole empire. Okay, a whole world. So let's realize what Milton is actually saying in regards to the conversation, fictional conversation between Khan and Kirk. Okay, in regards to a superior race, and when we talk about a superior race, we go back to superiority. Okay, we know where that stems to. All right, versus understanding it from how God intended it, not for the needs of the one, but for the needs of the many. Okay, so it says here, symbolic evolution of authority. Now we include Milton. Okay, because we know that Milton was the basis for the conversation between Khan and Captain Kirk in regards to the military tribunal that Khan fell subject to as a result of him trying to take over the ship or take over the vessel, okay, or take over the body. All right, Milton, architect of the liberty of slavery paradox, staged ideological rebellion, authority through consciousness, moral argument, resistance to tyranny. Historical role: John Milton supported rebellion against who? A king during the English Civil War. These were Scottish king, brothers and sisters. All right, King James on up. They're the one who wrote your Bible, all right? And they're the one who put that story in there about Adam and Eve. Guess what? They are the descendants of Adam and Eve. We're not. Why? Milton had described tyranny as a form of slavery of the soul. His language helped shape ideas of liberty, resistance, and moral freedom. This is the reason why we got into what we call King Edgar and now the decentralization and what we call modern law. Okay? Very important. The House of Stuart didn't decentralize the law. Okay? They maintained the centralization of the law by way of the needs of the one on behalf of the needs of the many, versus what we did by ending the feudal system that was established by them as a result of going back to William the Conqueror in the 11th century. Okay, 1066. All right. Prior to that, even though it was central, the office and capacity of what the mission was to maintain the continuity of the office and to maintain the continuity of the property, which was the land, okay? Because the land was the jurisdiction of the divine authority of where God's people dwell, and as a result of them understanding that, they were in that protection because they were baptized based upon that understanding of the jurisdictional personality that were required in lieu of you coming into this holy place, okay? Coming into this holy place. This is in fact a holy place. Let's get it. Khan. So we know the Khan, we know the Bey, and we understand that what resulted from Khan and Bey played out in the life of John Morris at the time of the English Civil War. All right, and we know that the English Civil War was preceded by what King Edgar established. And we know King Edgar was at war with Khan or the Beys, who are descended down from the same family line, which is called Arabs. Okay, very, very important. I didn't say that. The 1911 Encyclopedia Britannica said it. Okay, so let's continue. Let's go a little deeper, brothers and sisters. Symbolic evolution of authority. You've seen the chart, the flow chart. Now we're going to look at the chart without the flow based upon the picture, okay? We understand that Milton was the root or the basis or the foundation for the empires that was established by Khan and their descendants, i.e. the Arabs, which would be the Beys, and it was based upon a federation, a unification based upon the same principles resulting from the capacity to rule. The needs of the one over the needs of the many. This is why the law was decentralized, which we now call modern law. Okay? Stage one, rebellion against what? The kingly power. We know in 1707, there was unification, 1701, there was unification between England, Ireland, and Scotland. Okay? They unified the crown. Okay? But it was not under a central system. It was an interregnum. Why? Because there were no office or no tenure in lieu of the capacity as created from the time of King Edgar, our Lord and Christ. Okay? So this was the fall of God's kingdom, or what we call the golden age, all right? To a time of hardship, okay? Vulnerability, all right? Stifleness, all right? We must understand the transition. Here is John Mills. I did the work for you. John Milton, part so. From engraving by Fawthorne. These are scenes from the English Civil War. This goes into the execution of what? Charles the First. All right? Very important. Now let's break this down. Historical frame, John Milton from 1608 to 1674. Now remember, he was the subject matter on the Enterprise. We know the Enterprise was called the Starship Enterprise, USSC 1701, and guess what? We ain't even in 1701 yet, okay? We're in 1608 to 1674. And we're looking at the historical frame from John Milton as a historical figure, and based upon the authority we see in the flow chart or the model, he challenged the divine authority or the divine right or the divine authority of the king. Okay, King of Kings, Lord of Lords. Okay, all right. So let's look at the elements in Milton's world. Okay, not the world of Khan or the world of Captain Kirk, because right now they're up in the sky in this damn vessel. Okay, and a ship. All right, very important. The War in Heaven poem, Angel rebels against a kingly order. A war in heaven, I might add. Angel rebels against a kingly order. This is a conversation between Khan and Captain Kirk. We know the word Kirk means church, and we know God denotes to the church, and hell denotes to earth. I mean, the devil denotes to earth. Okay, very important to put things in their proper perspective. Spectrum. So we see elements in Milton's world was the war in heaven, and the angels rebelled against a kingly order. Elements in Milton world, other elements in Milton world, real events. English Civil War was a real event. King versus what? Parliament. Okay, this was known as an interregnum. We already know this if you understand the lawful capacity that you should be in regards to understanding what went on in God's jurisdiction under God's authority. Because what we're reading right now was not based upon God's authority and God's jurisdiction. God's jurisdiction under God's authority was taken over. That meant that those who were subject to God's grace and within the jurisdiction were now outside the grace because there was no divine authority anymore. All right, because we see that the authority was being overthrown. All right, these are real life events we're talking about. The English Civil War, English Civil War. Milton's position was he supported what? The overthrow of the king. So he recognized that the king should be overthrown. Captain Kirk recognized it, and Khan recognized it because they both had the poem in their archives. The outcome: revolution fails, monarchy restored. Okay, Milton personal fall, blind, politically ruined, and hiding. Okay, that's where most of you are going to be in. Okay, once the truth come out. But let's take away one key idea. Milton writes the Paradise Lost not as a fantasy, y'all. Okay, not as a fantasy, but a political theology disguised as a epic poetry that was discussed on a Starship Enterprise on a set in a movie. Okay, written by a gentleman by the last name of Jeffries. Okay, all right. So it's all fiction. Okay. Now let's set the stage for stage 2. The New World as exile and an experiment. Now we already know we're within the English Empire because the English Empire is within the continent of North America. We know that. We have a map to justify that. But all of a sudden now, when we get to the time of the colonies, all right, which was spoken about in the movie Star Trek, about colonizing the planet, okay, and taking over the planet, all right, very important to put this in this proper perspective. So that's what we're here to do. Now it's called North America. The map didn't say North America. It said the English Empire was within the continent of North America. So whoever's calling North America is not from North America. That meant that you invaded the landmass called North America. Okay? We're dealing with invaders, conquerors, discoverers. Very important to understand the key takeaways. There's John Milton and his family. Okay, colonists. Sorry about that. Colonies of North America at the Declaration of Independence. Okay. John Milton and his colony and the colonists who colonized this landmass, which was called the English Empire within the continent of North America. Okay, they're the ones who started calling it North America. Okay, not us. They called it that. Here they are setting up shop. All right. Now, Captain Kirk and Khan are talking about in a spaceship up in space, okay, about what's going on the planet at the time of John Milton's era. And you know we must have been in hell if at this time we're property. So we were not in God's grace because we were not subject to the jurisdiction where God's divine authority was, okay? And that was a result of us not being baptized as lawful vessels, okay? We were not baptized as lawful vessels, all right? But now we can because now we understand the jurisdiction in which we should have been in the first place, all right? The American becomes the physical version of Milton's cosmic exile. Okay? A Milton cosmic exile. In Milton's poem, with a real world parallel. Now we know who was cast out of heaven? Khan. Okay? And Captain Kirk said that just like Lucifer was cast down to hell, he said better to reign in hell than to rule in heaven, or something to that effect. Okay? So we see here in Milton's poem, based upon the real world parallel, Satan was cast into hell. Denotes to rebels, dissenters, radicals, flees to the colonies. You hear that? Satan cast into hell. Rebels, dissenters, radicals, flees to the colonies. Better to reign in hell. Kant's preferred frontier autonomy over crown rule. Did y'all hear that? Do y'all see the connection I'm making? Okay? We was already in heaven, okay? Because we were under God's divine authority based upon the jurisdiction which was governed by God's law, okay? It wasn't until they came over here that God's law was replaced, okay? All right? Satan became ruler of the planet, all right? Now, new dominion in a wasteland, colonial expansion into what? The Americas, all right? Which is right there. Colonies function as what? A political pressure valve, a religious laboratory, and a frontier for displaced power struggle. This is eugenics in the United States, okay? But here's where the moral fracture appears. Stage, let's look at it, y'all. Remember, you think of ships, you think of vessels. Okay? When you say ship, you're talking about a vessel, whether you're up in the sky, floating around in space, or whether you're floating around or floating on the sea. Okay? Remember, we're talking about water, okay? Not space. Okay? We're talking about water, not space. Okay? When you were enslaved in the water, in that space lacked that capacity. Because if you had the capacity, you would not be in that space floating on the water, because we know the water is the as we said, is the mission, okay? It is the spirit of what the vessel was ordained to do, okay? Which was to create a statutory entity based upon the lawful vessel, which resulted from baptism, based upon you understanding jurisdictional personality, which is the mind of God, okay? The mind of God. Stage 3, the slavery paradox expanded core. This is the deepest contradiction in Milton's era. Okay? There go the ships. You've seen them many a times. All in the name of eugenics. See the slave ships. You got the fiction, i.e., the Star Trek Enterprise, USS 1701, or you got the actual ship, i.e., cargo ship, i.e., vessels. Okay. Right? They're putting us to work now. All right. Milton's language versus imperial reality. Concept in Milton's writing and in the real world. Slavery was, in Milton's writing, was a metaphor denoting to tyranny, sin, oppression of the soul. And in the real world, literal racialized chattel slavery. Once again, the concept of slavery in Milton's writing was a metaphor for tyranny, sin, oppression of the soul. And don't forget, Khan and Captain Clerk had the poem in their archive, okay, in their conversation in the court martial of Khan in lieu of his disposition or his transferring from the ship to Alpha, what was it, Alpha 5, wherever that was, okay? But we're looking at the symbolic symbolism, the symbolism in it, okay? So we said the concept in Milton's writing denote to metaphors that don't denote to tyranny, sin, oppression of the soul, and in the real world, literal racialized chattel slavery. And the freedom from kingly rule, and in the real world, freedom for some, enslavement for others. And the concept rebellion in Milton's writing was noble resistance to tyranny, and in the real world, empire simultaneously expanding force by labor. Okay, there you have it. What was happening while Milton wrote Paradise Lost? Let's see. What was happening when he wrote this book? Or poem, I should say. What was happening while Milton wrote Paradise Lost? During the mid-1600s, England massively expanded the Atlantic slave trade. Barbados became one, and don't say England, because England are not the English people. English people are us. You are British or Scottish subjects, okay? Very important to understand that. Barbados became one of the most brutal slave societies on earth. Virginia codified race-based hereditary slavery. You hear that? Virginia codified race-based hereditary slavery. So it was passed down. Enslaved Africans became the economic foundation of the empire, not based upon the continuity and consistency of maintaining the property, but they were only in it not for continuity, but for profit. Okay? Economic, contractual profit gain. This is what they were all about. So at the exact moment Milton writes about freedom, the British world is inventing, let's see what they are inventing. Permanent racial slavery, legal status of humans as property. Y'all hear this? An empire built on coerced labor. Okay? So now we have to ask ourselves, based upon the conversation that Captain Kirk and Khan was having with the rest of his crew, all right, on the what we call the deck of the vessel, okay? Very important to understand how this applies to us, all right, in regards to 100 years or 1,000 years of the return of the true church, okay? Because we know Captain Kirk Church was not. And I ain't going to have time to go into that today. I'll go into that part on part 8, okay? So the paradox. Milton's side argued that no man should be enslaved to a king, all right? Not to a king, but to y'all, though. All right? You can't be enslaved by a king, but you can be enslaved by y'all. It's not for the needs of the many, but for the needs of the one. Okay? So Milton's side argued that no man should be enslaved to a king, but empire simultaneously should be enforced. Some men may be enslaved to other men. Did you hear that? This contradiction becomes the hidden moral engine behind what? Colonial expansion, American history, and later revolutions. Let's go into stage 4. Khan as a Miltonic fallen angel. Let's look at it. All right. All this is scripted. All scripted, brothers and sisters. I'm sorry. Keep going too fast. Now we're talking about the capacities of Milton, Khan, Captain Kirk, and King Edgar. Okay? And let's see which one matches up with the law. Okay? Khan mirrors Milton's Satan. Khan mirrors Milton's Satan more than any other sci-fi character. Once again, Khan mirrors Milton's Satan more than any other sci-fi character. Let's see why. Milton, Satan, and Khan. Superior being cast down, genetically superior, augmented exile. Prefers rule in hell. Chooses dominion on Seti Alpha 5. Rejects order in heaven. Rejects federation society. Pride and ambition, genetic elitism, ideology. Okay? This is the echo in colonial days. Let's see why. That extended into the colonial days. Let's see. Kirk does what empires did. removed dangerous figures, sent him to the frontier, and let him rule in exile. You hear that? Kirk, or the church, does what empires did. Remove the dangerous figure, send him to the frontier, and let him rule into exile. Okay? That mirrors how empires handle rebels, criminals, and unwanted elites. Stage 5. Modern law. Response to the paradox. Okay? This is why we hold our mission so highly. Okay? To maintain the continuity of the divine authority of the jurisdiction that God covered. Okay? And that means the land. All right? And in this present day or modern day, you need courts for that. Okay? You need a courtroom. Modern constitutional system tries to fix the Miltonic contradictions. Early authority, modern attempted solution. So this, we went from centralization to the decentralization of the king's law and to the law that is now statutorily preserved. Okay? Very important. King's divine rule, rule of law. Okay? Early authority, modern attempted solution. So the king's divine rule became the rule of law in modern days. Religious covenants now became secular institutions. You hear that? Did you hear that? Secular institution, meaning governed by law. Empire via domination, domination became legal equality doctrine. Slavery as property systems became human right frameworks. Okay? The burden shift from ruler to what? Law itself. Okay? It switched from ruler to law itself. It has been decentralized. Why slavery? Why slavery is the central axis? Because it exposes the gap between ideals and power. Milton's age teaches what? Ideas of liberty can coexist with systems of what? Domination. Okay? Ideas of liberty can coexist with systems of domination. Okay? Very important to understand that. That lesson is exactly what Kant ignores, Kirk struggled with, and modern law tries imperfectly to reconcile. Once again, this lesson that I'm trying to teach you is what Kant didn't get, Kirk didn't get, the churches didn't get, the corporations didn't get, you didn't get, as a result of you not understanding your lawful capacity as statutory entities. Okay? So you must understand the final structure in regards to the parallel I'm giving you here today. Let's go ahead. Now let's go here. Are y'all ready for this? I hope so. The rituals of the three knocks in British and European tradition. Okay, this was uh, evolved into or evolved from the Trinity. Okay, very important. All right, let's just get a breakdown on that real quick. The rituals of the three knocks in British and European traditions, which all involve the church, Masonic lodges, etc. All that was passed down or reinterpreted or invented, all right, based upon the true origin where it stems from, okay? And if it's not the true capacity of where it stems from, then it's invalid, okay? It's ultra-virus upon inspection, okay? So it's very important to understand why the statutory parts of the jurisdictional personality of understanding God's divine law, which we call statutory law, is very important, all right? Because it puts you in that capacity, all right? You must be a part of that school of thought. Look at all the brothers in the back. Okay? They ain't in it for their own personal gain. They're about the mission. Continuity of office denotes to continuity of possession of property. Okay? If you can protect the property, then you are within the jurisdiction of that divine authority, which is the supreme law of the land, which is the grace. Okay? It's that shield. Okay? It's that shield. All right? This is what King Edgar preserved for us. Okay? He swore to us. All right? Very important. Not to us, but the church, which is now a corporation soul. Now other organizations, i.e. the Roman Catholic Church, i.e. Parliament, are copying it, okay? State opening of Parliament, same thing. Now it's based upon knocks, okay? Parliament, that's the government. Then you got the church, Anglican and Ecclesiastical Church, all right? With the three knocks. House of Commons, Archbishop of Canterbury, same symbolic tradition, okay? Different capacity though. You have the Habsburg burial rite. You also got the Masonic ritual rites that encompass some of the same traditions, but they lack the capacity as we see it based upon the divine authority and the jurisdiction in which the law was applied. Okay? So it puts us under that divine authority, which is that protection, i.e. that grace. All right? Anything outside of that grace is considered what? Ultra-virus. All right? So for us to understand that that jurisdictional personality, we must understand what King Edgar actually meant to us, and that's understanding the coronation order structure that he created in the 10th century. Okay? The ceremony used by King Edgar the Peaceful in 973 comes from what scholars call the Second English Coronation Order, a church service book, not law. It didn't become law until it was decentralized. Okay? Very important. Core part of order. We know the word order means order. Order. Okay? We know order means continuity. Okay? Consistency. Okay? So the stage, meaning, religious frame based upon what King Edgar brought forth in lieu of what we call order. Okay? Order. Recognition of the king, meaning people acknowledge the ruler, and community consent under God in lieu of that ruler that was put in that capacity. Okay? Not for his personal stuff, but for the people. Remember, the needs of the many supersede the needs of the one. Okay? Also, oath. King promised a just rule. All right? Not do whatever he wanted, but to rule on behalf of the people. This was sworn before his clergy, as well as the anointing with holy oil, which makes the kingship, the ceremony, the conveyance sacred, a direct biblical parallel to what was done in the ancient days of King David and Solomon, okay? Which was in the vesture, which were regalia denoting to a sword, a ring, and a scepter, which is a symbol of the authority based upon the capacity as established by the office, okay? which is a spiritual and civil duty. Whether it was ecclesiastical or public, nonetheless, that office must be maintained. Okay? This is the purpose of crowning, mass, and communion. Public constructive notice. Public confirmation. King partakes as a Christian. Christ-like kingship symbolism. Full Trinitarian literary. Okay? Very important. This was the most important thing about what he promised. The oath. Okay? The king pledged to defend what? The church, maintain justice, and keep peace amongst the people. This three-party duty is where later writers see a triple structure, but the Trinity is assumed through the church services, not written as a legal formula, not based upon some incorporated policy, not based upon some bylaws, etc. Okay? This was the divine authority that governed the jurisdiction, that created the grace for all those who were in the like manner or the like consciousness of the lawful vessel based upon the jurisdictional personality that is required. Okay? Very important. This was Edgar's rule of law. Okay? Continuity, consistency. One second. Bear with me for a second, brothers and sisters. Okay. Let's get it. Okay, let's come to our closing. We'll touch more on this tomorrow. So I'll backtrack a little bit tomorrow to cover what passed over today, because I want to come to an end in lieu of today's lesson. Right here. Let's go a little bit deeper. Okay, the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the one. The needs of the many outweigh the needs of the one. Kirk, which we also know means church, all right? We know King Edgar reformed the English Church of England versus the Church of England, which is we know goes back to the Roman Catholic Church, okay? As we can see, based upon the chart, based upon Kirk, which we know means church, his take on it was the need of the one outweighed the needs of the many, okay? Versus King Edgar's needs of the many outweighed the needs of the one, okay? Because he was looking at it from a fictional ethical standpoint. He was looking at it symbolically based upon the decentralization of the divine authority or the divine law that's written by God, which is governed under ecclesiastical and canon law, okay? Not based upon some book written by John Rottenberg, okay? So it's very important to understand logically, okay? All right? In order for you to understand logic, you got to look at it with Spock's mind, okay? Without emotion, because a lot of us get emotion when we go into these arguments, okay? It's not emotional for us because we understand our argument is sound doctrine, okay? Sound, right reasoning. It only sounds right if the divine authority governs the jurisdiction. And we know when we say divine authority and jurisdiction, we're talking about statutory law, okay? Statutory law. So when we look at the capacity of Captain Kirk, which was fiction, and the capacity of King Edgar, which was historical, as well as relevant to the days, based upon the decentralization of the law, which we know is under 16:1-28 and Title 46. This serves as a moral that the king took an oath to in regards to the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the one. Okay? That's very important to understand that in lieu of today's lesson. I'm not thinking about myself. I'm thinking about you. But all y'all do is think about yourselves. Why? Because you don't want to live within a holy vessel. You don't want to live within a lawful vessel. Because to do that, you must take on the statutory identity of a statutory entity, and that only comes through understanding law. Jurisdictional personality. Not person, but personality. Okay? Very important. Coming to my closing. One more chart. Okay? Just look at this chart real good. Okay? Let's look at it real good, y'all. All right? Break it down or simplify it. Once again, we're talking about the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the one. That's not Captain Kirk's job. We know Captain Kirk was up in outside the planet, outside in space, talking about what was going on Earth. And it wasn't based upon the needs of the many, but it's based upon the needs of the one. Okay? So we know that is a lie. Okay? Versus the needs of the many versus the need of the one, which was not there out there in space. It was right here on Earth. I.e. Anastomenius, okay, our Lord, okay, very important. And his capacity was not for his personal self, but the needs of the many, which outweighed the needs of himself, okay. We know that because of the capacity as authorized by what? The statute, okay. The statute is the transfer of the conveyance of the responsibility in regards to the jurisdiction that the divine authority governed, which was what? The land. Title 46 deals with the land, okay? Not the capacity. You need Title 16 for that, okay? Captain Kirk, nor Khan, nor the Bays are using any type of lawful statutory application to denote to any type of jurisdiction in which you will prevail. Okay? For that, you need that divine authority, which we call statutory law. Okay? One for the capacity, and two for the interest to take an interest and the property. Okay, very important. You lack that as a result of the distortion of the representation. The distortion of the representation. Okay, we don't have a distortion of the representation. Why? Because the representation is right here in the statute. Okay, right there in the statute. The statute gives us a mirror of who we are as statutory entities. Okay, outside of our natural capacity. Okay, we know from the statutes we have an interest in because we're within the jurisdiction of God's divine authority. Okay, which is protected because we're within God's grace. Okay, here on earth. Why? Because we know that the earth is governed by laws. All right, statutory laws. Very important. There is no distortion of the representation. Why? Because we understand that the representation is not, in fact, the reality. Okay? How we know it? Let's look at it. And close it. As we can see, based upon Captain Kirk, i.e. the church, based upon their logic, it's the symbolic needs of the one outweigh the needs of the many, because we know based upon Christianity, how it's being taught, many are saved through the one who sacrificed for the greater, i.e. the many, one life for the survival of many. Okay? That's contrary to the capacity that was incorporated within the one for the sake of the many, which says that all the states of inheritance are stabilized, okay, as free, simple, absolute, free from all fatal incidents, defeatable only by lawful conveyance. Why? Because the statutory law based upon the water, and the water is that which is consists as a statutory entity because of the jurisdictional personality that the statute gave you. Okay? Very important. This is called the rule of law, constitutional authority, the rights of the people, and due process of law. All right? Why? Because we understand that representation is not reality. What is representation? Let's look at it in closer. Law protects the many through a republic of laws. Okay? Let's close out on this right here. Representation. What is it? This is what a lot of you need to grasp. Okay? Not from your physical faculties, not from the faculties in which you hear, taste, touch, smell, and sight, from your internal faculty, meaning your mind. Okay? In lieu of what we call representations of what we call reality. Okay? We must understand that representation is not reality. Once again, representation is not reality. And reality is what you assume is in fact true. Okay? So if it's not in fact reality, well, what is it? A representation is a model, image, story, argument, label, or symbol that stands in for something. The reality is that it's the thing itself. They are not the same. Okay? They are not the same. One, in stories like Spock or Straw Vulcan, Spock represents logic, but he is in fact denotes to written by authors, shaped by drama, and simplified to create contrast. So, Spock represents logic itself. Okay? Once again, Spock represents logic itself. That is, in fact, a representation. Okay? 2. Let's look at it in law. Representation. Straw man fallacy. Remember, we're not talking about a legal jurisdictional person. We're talking about a jurisdictional personality. Okay? Totally different. We're talking about a jurisdictional person, you're talking about that straw man. We're talking about a jurisdictional personality, you're talking about your understanding of the law, okay? Which they lack. A lawyer mistakes an opponent's position. Why? Because they mistake his capacity. They want chaos, we want order. But the only way to get order, we must do what King Edgar did, reform ourselves. When the real argument is, we want what? Reform. That false version contrast to reform is what? A representation, but not what? Reality. Courts work hard to separate the two. What was actually said versus how it was framed. Listen, y'all. We did point 1, point 2, now we're on point 3 in regards to representation is not reality. A crown represents what? Authority. A flag represents what? A nation. A constitution represents legal order. Okay? But the cross flag is not the people. The paper constitution is not the justice. They are symbols pointing to what? The system. Okay? Pointing to the system, but not the system itself. We can look at the same thing through philosophy. Point 4. This idea goes back to Plato. The map is not the territory. The image of the sun is not the sun. Humans operate through what? Symbols, but symbols are futures, not the thing itself. Okay? Everything that we see with our five senses is nothing more than illusion as a result of they're not represented by reality. Okay? They're not represented by reality. They only are stand-in. They only serve as a stand-in. Okay? Why this matters, according to the chart we just reviewed. In closing. The whole diagram deals with representation and reality. Kirk in representation and reality represents a fictional leadership tension. Edgar, representation and reality represents a historical kingship duty. Law text historically represents an actual legal system. Logic character actually represents real reasoning, and statutes represent in reality how courts interpret them. Did you hear that? If we forget the difference, we start treating it as such, as these, as revealed. If we forget the difference, points out, if we forget the difference, we start treating stories as doctrine, which we all do, symbols as facts, which we all do, labels as identity, which we all do, and arguments as truth, which we all do. These are called legal assumptions or presumptions or assumptions, which in a court of law can be proven wrong. Okay? Can be proven wrong. The warning. The warning meaning. Representation is not reality. It is what? A guardrail. It says, don't mistake the model for the real thing. Why? Because logic, caricature, means logic. Legal wording denotes to legal effect, and symbolic meaning must be denoted to historical proof. Okay? Very important. The deeper insight, human cannot operate without representation. Language itself is symbolic, so the task isn't to avoid the representation, it is to what? Remember. All representation is partial. Where Khan Nooning Singh sits in the flowchart, Khan represents the earliest and most unstable form of what? Authority. Rules justified by superiority. Rules justified by superiority. You hear that? Not law, not covenant, not consent, not moral duty. Okay? And we know who Khan represented, right? Lucifer. Or Satan. Just fitness to the rule. Policy. Okay? What makes Khan symbolically important? From a Star Trek episode Space Seed, trait and symbolic meaning. Trait, symbolic meaning. Genetically engineered, claims natural rights to rule. You hear that? conquered large territory, power-based legitimacy, benign but absolute, ordered without accountability, overthrown, power rule is unstable, exiled, not executed, cycles of authority continues, i.e. continuity. Order is not about what's right or wrong, good or bad, what's lawful or unlawful. It's about continuity. Kant embodies this idea of continuity. If someone is better, they should rule. Okay? That's pre-constitutional thinking. All right? How he contrasts with the others. Authority type, source of legitimacy. Con, biological superiority. Bay, part self. Bay's delegated authority. I'm sorry. So we see, come on here. So we see archetype, social legitimacy. Cons, biological superiority. Bayes, delegated administration. Kirk, moral choice. Eger, sacred duty. And law, institutional structure. Okay? Very important that you understand that and frame it right. Come on. Kant sits at the origin point of evolution. Did you hear that? Kant sits at the origin point of evolution. While the episode title Space Seed matters. Listen, y'all. Spock asks, what will this seed grow into? Okay? Spock asks, what would this seed grow into? Symbolically, what does that mean? The seed, i.e. idea of power without moral or legal restraint. Our flow chart shows what history does with that seed. Okay, very important. The seed is the idea. Okay, a power without moral or legal restraint. That's what our flow chart shows. This is what our mission shows. Okay, we need order, legitimate order, not illegitimate order. Okay, very, very important that we comprehend this. Why did Kirk spare Khan? Why Kirk spares him? Kirk does something crucial. He does not rule by Khan's logic, okay, which is by conquer. He uses judgment, law-like procedures, doing what we call a hearing. Not civil, not criminal, but military. Nonetheless, it was a procedure. Conditional exile. Okay? Very important. We go through the same thing every day. That is a shift from might to moral authority. Okay? A one-line symbolic summary of what we just talked about. Khan is the seed of power rule. The rest of your chart shows, or the rest of our chart shows the world, civilizations trying to tame that seed. Oh, this is a strong symbolic layer, brothers and sisters. We're connecting Khan, Lucifer, and the fall of powerful rulers inside the authority evolution chart, which also includes John Millen. Okay? Let's keep it mythic, literally symbolism, not history. Okay? Another half an hour. Okay. Khan Paradise Lost. In Space Seed, Khan especially evokes Paradise Lost. The poem centers on Satan, often called Lucifer, in later traditions. Lucifer archetype, trait and meaning. Most gifted being, superiority, challenges order, rebellion, falls from power, loses, loss of legitimacy, exile, not destroyed, influences continue. You hear that? Right there in your Star Trek movie. This is exactly Khan's narrative arc. Okay? Khan's ruling a quarter of the earth. Symbolically, this placed him in the category of world rulers archetypes, elements and symbolic meaning. Large territory, universal ambition. Firm but peaceful, order without consent. Disposed, power without moral foundation collapse. This means the ability to be able to dispose of or dispossess people of their property. This matches the ancient pattern. The great conqueror appears invincible until legitimacy fails. You hear that? Cryogenic sleep. The frozen power. Khan and his followers is suspended animation presents power that is dormant but not gone, symbolically. Alright? Very important. We're talking about the devil's seed. State and meaning. State and meaning. Frozen, ideas of domination preserved. And space, outside society. Reawakened later, power logic returns in new era. So the seed spot mentioned is, let's read, the recurring temptation to rule by what? Superiority. Don't you see that happening today? How this fits into our flow chart. How this fits into our flow chart. Khan becomes the startling mythic point of the biblical figure called what we call Lucifer. Khan is denotes to the fallen conqueror, Lucifer archetype. Big organized rules replaces chaos. Kirk's moral choices restrain power. Edgar's sacred duty limits rulers, and law systems replace persons, i.e., statutory entities as a result of the judicial personality. Okay? Let's get a deeper philosophical message. Khan, Lucifer, symbolizes power claiming it deserves to rule because it is greater. The chart shows humanity's long effort to answer that with administration, ethics, sacred obligation, and what? That divine authority, that divine law. Okay? Very important to understand that within this closure. One sentence to synthesize everything we said, Khan is the Lucifer archetype of authority, brilliant, powerful, fallen, whose seed is the recurring danger of rule by superiority rather than by what? Responsibility. Our chart shows this as well. So with that, we'll close out on this one more picture. Right here and close. So one more look at the chart. Symbolic evolution of authority based upon what we discussed today. So we can now clearly point out that Khan represents the seed of a powerful rule, also under the known as the archetype Lucifer, symbolic of the fallen conqueror. Okay, rebellion, fall, dormant power. This passed on to to Khan, Kirk's arch rival, which is also known to Lucifer. Fallen conqueror archetype rules a quarter of Earth by superiority. Symbol: Lucifer, rebellion and falling from power, suspended asleep with his followers, the one who bears burden, the most powerful individual. King Edgar, sacred ruler in coronation, tradition, authority through duty, covenant, moral obligation tied to the office. The stage, sacred kingship, the one who bears burden, the anointed ruler, bound by oath, which is now decentralized to what we call modern law, brothers and sisters. Modern law, from orders, what's it called? Novus orders to Clorum. From order, from chaos comes order. Okay? Novus orders to Clorum. And I think this is it. That's it. Okay. So we'll close our screen. Make sure I covered everything. So with that, please understand how important it is to understand God's law. Okay? God's divine law or God's divine authority or God's statutory authority as it applies today. This is the law that will put you in God's grace because you're within God's jurisdiction. And the jurisdiction is the law governing territorial, subject matter, and personam jurisdiction. And in the eyes of a court of a law, the only way you be in God's grace within God's jurisdiction based upon divine authority is to be baptized as a lawful vessel, and as a lawful vessel, that only can be done by way of jurisdictional personality of understanding of law. And once you do that, that will gird you with the capacity under Title 16 in lieu of the lack of water, which is the mission that was poured into the vessel, which is the corporation soul, for you to act in the statute as a statutory entity in lieu of the preservation of the continuity of the office and the possession of that which was promised to us from time immemorial, going all the way back to those kings, i.e. King Edgar the Peaceful, based upon the needs of the many and not needs of the one. And with that, I greeted you as I greeted you with the love of our ancestors. Peace.